ever feel like no matter how much good you do, it's just like never enough?
Yeah.
Well, get ready to feel really inadequate because today, oh boy, today we're diving into the world of Salvianus of Marseille. This 5th century writer, he makes your average donate to the charity basket sermon sound like, I don't know, like a motivational speech.
Yeah.
This guy really wants you to think about wealth, or I guess more precisely, how guilty you should feel about having it.
Right.
But luckily, I'm not alone in this guilt trip today. I've got our expert here to help break it all down.
Happy to be here.
We are tackling excerpts from Salvianus's Against Greed, Book 2.
Yeah.
And let me tell you, he does not mince words.
Nope.
This deep dive, it's about to get, well, intense.
It really is.
Okay, so picture this. 5th century, Roman Empire's crumbling, and society feels like it's hanging by a thread. People are looking for answers, looking for someone to tell them what's going wrong.
Right. A lot of uncertainty.
Enter Salvianus, stage left, with his treatise Against Greed, and he just drops a truth bomb right out of the gate.
You guys.
He basically says, and I'm paraphrasing here, listen up, folks. Whether you spend your Sundays lighting votive candles or, you're knee-deep in questionable life choices,
Right.
you are massively in debt to God. Massively.
It's putting it mildly.
No pressure. Right. It's like he's holding up a mirror to society's anxieties and saying, yeah, things are bad out there, but you're not off the hook either. What I think is so fascinating is how Salvianus uses this almost impossible standard of debt to grab people's attention.
Yeah.
Like he knew how to push those buttons.
Yeah, exactly. It's important to remember that this was a time when people's faith, it was very real, very present in their lives.
Yeah.
And this whole idea that you were constantly in debt to God, that nothing you could do could ever truly repay that debt, that would have been a huge wake-up call.
Oh, absolutely. It'd be like thinking, oh, I tossed a few coins to that beggar. I'm good with the big guy upstairs. And then having Salvianus come along and be like, hold on.
Hold on.
And then proceed to just list everything God has done for humanity.
Yeah.
From creating the universe to, the small matter of sacrificing his son for our sins.
Right.
Talk about a guilt trip. It's enough to make you want to empty your pockets and join a monastery.
Well, there was a lot of that going around at the time.
Yeah.
But you're right. Salvianus, he's playing on this very visceral fear of divine judgment. He's saying, don't kid yourself. Even the most devout among you, they haven't done enough.
Right. So I'm thinking, okay, maybe this whole debt thing, maybe it only applies to us regular folks.
Right.
But then Salvianus is like, nope, even the saints aren't off the hook. Like, what?
Yeah, he doesn't let anyone off easy.
He uses this, it's actually a brilliant analogy of debtors. Just because somebody else owes more doesn't mean that magically your slate's wiped clean.
Exactly.
You're still on the hook for your own debt, no matter how pious you may think you are.
And this is where it gets really interesting, I think, because Salvianus isn't just talking in these, abstract terms. He's specifically targeting the wealthy elite, even the ones who seem, at least outwardly, devout.
Oh, and
He's challenging this idea that you can buy your way into God's good graces through, donations or public displays of piety.
Right.
He's calling out hypocrisy, basically.
Which, let's be honest, that's a timeless issue.
Oh, absolutely.
Even today, right? We see
Yeah.
people trying to, I don't know, alleviate their guilt, boost their image, whatever, through charitable acts. But Salvianus, he throws everyone a curveball.
He does.
He says, stop comparing yourselves to others. He even quotes Philippians. Do not think only about what is best for yourselves, but also about what is best for others.
Yeah, that's a good one.
And it's a surprisingly modern-sounding argument. He's basically saying, it's not enough to just avoid being bad. You have to actively do good.
You have to try, right?
You have to try. And he doesn't stop there. He gets really specific about what that good should look like. Depending on, who you are and what position you hold in society.
Everyone has their part to play.
It's like Salvianus sat down with his quill and wrote a whole how to be good for really real this time guidebook.
Yeah, like a how-to manual.
And nobody, and I mean nobody, gets off easy.
Yep.
So you're probably thinking, all right, Salvianus, lay it on me. Who gets the toughest love in this little guidebook of yours?
Yeah, who gets the most to worry about?
And let me tell you, he does not disappoint. Widows, virgins, monks, even the clergy, he's got something to say to everyone. And it's usually along the lines of, you should probably be poorer than you are, just saying.
Just a little something to think about.
It's like Salvianus, he looked around at the social ladder of his day and said, yeah, you know what? Everyone's got to climb down a few rungs. It'll be good for you.
Yeah, check your privilege,
Right,
basically.
all right.
But it's easy to see this as extreme, I guess, but when you really think about the context, it makes a lot of sense.
Okay.
Remember, this is a time when outward displays of piety were everything.
Oh, right. Yeah.
So if you were, say, a wealthy widow,
Yeah.
it wasn't enough to just live quietly and maybe, like, do a few good deeds here and there.
Mm-hmm.
Salvianus would argue that you should be giving away your wealth,
Really?
actively embracing poverty as a sign of, like, your devotion.
Wow. So no pressure there. Oh, you lost your husband. Time to lose the villa, too.
Pretty much.
And don't even think that you can just, like, swan around being a pious virgin either.
Right.
Because Salvianus has thoughts about that, too.
He has thoughts about everything.
Oh, yeah. He's basically saying being pure in thought and deed is great and all, but how about, like, putting those good intentions into serious action?
You put your money where your mouth is, basically.
Exactly.
He even uses the parable of the 10 virgins,
Oh, right.
which is a story that would have been very familiar to his audience to make his point. But he gives it this, like, goose, this really intense interpretation that would have made people sit up and really pay attention.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like, he's taking these really familiar religious stories. He's just like, hold my drink. I'm about to drop some truth bombs.
I'm about to lay down some truth.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And when it comes to the clergy, oh boy, he really lets loose.
Oh, yeah. Nobody is safe from Salvianus' critique.
No, definitely not. He is particularly scathing about religious leaders who enjoy, I don't know, like, wealth and privilege.
Yeah.
It's like, he's like, remember Jesus, guys, the one who said it's easier for a camel to go through the eye of a needle than for a rich man to get into heaven.
Yeah. He really calls them out on that.
Oh, yeah, big time.
And it reflects a very real tension within the church at the time.
Yeah.
As the church gained power and influence, it also accumulated wealth.
Right. Makes sense.
And for Salvianus, this was a huge problem.
Yeah.
Because he truly believed that true piety meant renouncing worldly possessions, following Christ's example of poverty and humility.
So essentially, he's calling out the hypocrisy, and he is not mincing words.
Yeah.
No. He sees this disconnect between what these religious leaders are preaching and how they're actually living, and I'm telling you, it drives him crazy.
Yeah. It's like he can't even.
Yeah, he can't even. But here's the thing that I think is so interesting. Salvianus, he doesn't just rail against wealth from this moral high ground. Like, he actually tries to understand the psychology of greed.
That's true.
He gets into the nitty-gritty of why it's so tempting, why it can be so destructive, how it distracts us from what really matters.
And that's what makes Salvianus so fascinating, I think, because he's not just some, like, out-of-touch moralist.
Right.
He understands human nature.
He does.
He sees how greed can trap us, how it can become this endless cycle of always wanting more, never being satisfied. He even frames salvation as a kind of transaction, It's like you can't serve both God and wealth.
Yeah, that's interesting because even today, right? Like, even if we don't frame it in these religious terms, we still grapple with this idea of what we value most,
Oh, absolutely.
What are we willing to sacrifice for, security, status, that next big purchase?
Right, exactly. And, Salvianus was centuries ahead of his time in understanding how things like scarcity, fear, social comparison, influence our choices.
Really?
Think about it. We now have entire fields of study dedicated to understanding these psychological mechanisms.
That's true.
The ways in which our brains are wired to, crave more.
Wow. So it's like Salvianus was like a 5th century behavioral economist?
Right.
Wow. He understood how our desires can lead us astray, how they can distract us from the truly important things in life. Our relationships, our communities, our own sense of purpose. So we've spent this entire deep dive, really, kind of unpacking Salvianus's very intense, views on wealth and the human obsession with, more.
Right. It's a recurring theme for him?
Yeah, you could say that. And by now you're probably thinking, okay, I get it. I'm selfish. I'm materialistic. I'm thoroughly guilt-tripped. Now what?
Yeah. Where do we go from here?
Exactly. Does Salvianus offer, like, any practical advice? Or are we all doomed to, like, wander the earth weighed down by the guilt of our possessions?
It's funny you should ask that. Because you might be surprised to hear that Salvianus actually does offer a little bit of a lifeline maybe, a sort of get-out-of-jail-free card.
Oh.
Even for those of us who aren't, quite ready to trade in our worldly possessions for a hair shirt and a one-way ticket to the desert.
Okay, so what's the catch? What's his big solution?
Essentially, he says, fine, enjoy your wealth now,
Okay.
But this is a big but. Give it all away when you die.
So it's like the 5th century version of a trust fund, but like for the poor and not your spoiled heirs.
Exactly. And this wasn't some like crazy out there idea that Salvianus just like cooked up,
Right.
deathbed bequests to the church. They were actually becoming quite common during this time.
That makes sense, though. I mean, I can only imagine the anxiety, right? Like, you've spent your whole life accumulating all this wealth, and then you're facing eternity worried that your love for, all those earthly possessions might, well, cost you your place in the afterlife.
Oh, yeah. Salvianus is brilliantly tapping into that very real fear.
Smart.
He's reminding people, listen, in the grand scheme of things, clinging to your wealth on your deathbed, not a good look. Time to prioritize what truly matters.
So in a way, Salvianus's message, it's not really about money at all, is it? It's about, I don't know, our values, right? Like it's about examining our priorities. It's about challenging us to ask ourselves, what do we truly believe in? What do we want our legacy to be?
Absolutely. And I think that's a question that resonates just as strongly today as it did in the 5th century.
Oh, for sure.
Because even if we don't frame it in these same, like, religious terms,
Yeah.
we still grapple with these same questions.
It really is kind of like this age-old dilemma, right? Like, do we hoard our resources? Do we just cling tightly to, what we've accumulated? Or do we choose to share, to give back, to invest in something, well, bigger than ourselves?
That's the question, isn't it?
It really is. Salvianus, I mean, he may not have had all the answers, but he certainly knew how to ask the tough questions.
He did. He wasn't afraid of making people uncomfortable.
Not at all. And that's, well, it makes you think, right? Like questions that force us to really confront our own mortality and the impact of our choices, not just in this life, but in the great beyond too.
Yeah, the things that really matter in the end.
Exactly. So next time you're, feeling that urge to splurge, to chase after that next big thing, whatever it is, maybe take a moment, to remember Salvianus, remember his message of radical generosity, right? His plea for us to just like stop, focus on what truly matters. It might just change, your perspective, your priorities, maybe even your life. Who knows?
Start thinking about.
It really is.